I was in the hospital for 70 days with COVID, and I was intubated 2 times. I had a trachea, I had sepsis, and many days they didn't think I would survive. So what I'm about to share is something that I never imagined I'd experience, let alone live to even tell it. We arrived in a space that looked like a massive stadium where they have the skyboxes above the bleachers. I was surrounded by countless beings all around me with bright white clothing. Some looked brighter than others. All of a sudden, this angelic music started, and it filled the whole space from every single direction. The music was so beautiful. And I knew the words to every song, but I'd never heard them before. So I started singing. It was like the best concert I've ever been to.
The A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast.
I'm here with Holly Porter, and she had an amazing near-death experience during COVID. Hello, Holly. How are you?
I'm great, AJ. How are you?
Great. What can you tell us about this experience that you had?
I was in the hospital for 70 days with COVID, and I was intubated 2 times. I had a trachea, I had sepsis, and many days they didn't think I would survive. When I was in the hospital, there was a time when I had lost all 5 senses. So they tie your hands to the bed so that you won't pull your ventilator out. So I couldn't touch anything. And I had lost my taste and smell from COVID. I'm legally blind, naturally. So if I don't have correction on my eyes, I couldn't see who anyone was. And everybody was wearing a hat, a mask, and a gown that were yellow. So really all I could see was eyes. And I couldn't see who they were until they were about 8 inches in front of my face to be able to even tell who anybody was. And then the ventilator, for some reason for me, it took 90% of my hearing away and sounded like the Charlie Brown school teacher that does the wah, wah, wah. That's what everybody sounded like that were talking to me. So putting me and keeping me in a coma was a blessing. It really was. So what I'm about to share is something that I never imagined I'd experience, let alone live to even tell it. It's not a dream. It's not a vision. It was real. Okay. So I remember being in my hospital bed, and I was no longer on life support. This is part of the story, though. I really was on life support. But I left my room in my bed, and there's lots of stories with me in my bed we can talk about later. But I was going down the hallway, and I remember being still like not knowing what's going on. I'm being rolled down the hallway in the hospital. And I remember looking over at the receptionist and shaking my finger at her and saying, I rescind my DNR, I rescind my DNR. And I think that just was so like, why am I saying this, right? When I was headed down the hallway, I really didn't know what had gone on. I remember being clear when I pointed the finger at the poor receptionist and told her to rescind my DNR. I remember I must not wanted to die. I must have known I was going somewhere because I said that. I don't know why I said those words, but I told her those words. I rescind my DNR. And as I'm going down this long hallway, I see other beds going down the hallway with me, and didn't think much of it because I didn't really know what was going on. We were all calm. We're just gliding along, like as if we're guided by something bigger. I believe those other beds were people in the hospital that were dying. There were half of them dying at that time. And looking back, I believe now that's what that was. We arrived in a space that looked like a massive stadium where they have the skyboxes above the bleachers. There was just more of a feeling of peace and quietness and stillness of that going to where we ended up. And maybe it wasn't a stadium, but that's what it felt like to me to describe. That's what it felt like. I was no longer in my bed. And I remember being fully immersed in this vibrant spiritual realm. And I was surrounded by countless beings all around me with bright white clothing, and just looking around thinking, wow, that's like the words I had. Wow. And it was just radiant brightness everywhere I could see. There wasn't really anybody it looked like in charge. It just looked like a lot of, everybody was floating. It just looked like a lot, maybe a group of people that were in front leading, and everybody was singing. It was beautiful, beautiful music. All of the people were white or bright. So is how I would describe it, because I noticed some seemed and looked brighter than others, but it could have been the lighting. It could have been, I don't know. It just felt like just the brightest white and the brightest of golds and any bright, bright light you can think of to describe. It's so hard to describe the colors. The colors were just bright. It was just amazing to see. Nobody I recall being in normal clothes. They were all some type of long something, whether it be a dress or a robe. They all were long. I could see feet though, because I could see that they weren't touching the ground. Everybody was floating. So I could see feet. And there were all these conversations happening, but no mouths were moving. But you could look at somebody and have a conversation with them, light speed. It would just say back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And you'd have answers or knowledge, and just in an instant. So hard to explain that. And then all of a sudden, this angelic music started, and it filled the whole space from every single direction. I could hear this music. And I knew the words to every song, but I'd never heard them before. So I love to sing. So I joined right in and started singing, and it was just like so, I just awe. It was just such awe. The music was so beautiful. Everything around was loving. It was fun, which is good, because if it's not fun, I'm not doing it. It's one of my mantras. It was peaceful. It was airy, but really calming at the same time. And it was like the best concert I've ever been to, but it wasn't a concert, right? And next I entered into what I would call a life review, but I only saw good. And I saw acts of love and kindness, hugs and smiles. No reliving the mistakes I had made, the pain I had caused others. None of that. Just complete good. And it felt like a universe or God was saying to me, this is what mattered most. And then I watched all of this matter swirling around, and it was like a glowing rose-colored pink. And the matter would come and swirl, and then it would form into a heart, and it would float off to the left, which later I found out. So later's the light side. Everything would just go to the light. And then I was given two messages, very, very clear and distinct. The first one was to start a nonprofit called Adventure Bucket Wish. Not a lot of details with that. Just this is what I was supposed to do. And then the second thing was to not partner with a company that I had been in talks with about a business venture called Retreat R&R. And they had a billionaire backing them. So I felt like just before, in fact, the day I found out I had COVID, I had a pitch with them. And I was told in this, no, that is not the highest and the best place for this company. Do not partner with them. It'll derail things, but an alternate path was really for the highest good to wait. So suddenly, without me getting a choice, I came back. And I was just back in my body in my hospital room. And I felt really afraid. And I wonder am I feeling afraid? I remember just feeling that fear. And my sister Jill was in the room with me. They were taking 24-hour shifts to stay with me. My husband was home with COVID, couldn't come see me for 3.5 weeks. And she had ran an errand, even though stayed with me all the time. She ran an errand. And when she came back, I had just come out of this experience, and she grabbed the alphabet, and I had to communicate by pointing, and I had no energy. And of course I'm intubated. So I had to point at the alphabet on this piece of paper to spell out words. And sometimes it would take 2 hours to do that. And I'd be so exhausted from trying to get my word of what I wanted to say. I just like, forget it. It's not worth it. Put me back in a coma. I was in a coma about 32 of these 70 days. And I pointed and started spelling K-I-D. And she said, "Oh, do you want me to tell your kid something?" And she could tell, no, that wasn't it. I kept spelling N-A-P. She's like, "Kidnapped?" And later she told me I wanted to throw up. She said, I was like, "I left for just a few minutes. What happened while I was gone? You never left this room." And right when I finally communicated that to her, the doctor and the nurse walked in and came to extubate me and take out the life support tube. And so when they did that, I was able to talk, she said, but not very well. But I could say, and I had lots to say. But there were still people in the room. There were spirits in the room, I should say. And I quickly realized that I was the only one seeing them. And I remember her opening the closet and even the drawers, the bathroom door, trying to show me nobody was there. And I don't remember that I wasn't scared of that. I just remember it. I got kidnapped. Like, why is that feeling here? And it left me permanently changed. And it left me with a lot of clarity on a lot of things and a lot of confusion on some others. But it left me with a purpose that I never felt like I had for years. I had 11 startup companies in my businesses, and never really felt like, oh, this is it. And really finding out the love that was felt that was life-changing. So there's lots that happened after that, but that's the story of that part.
You said you had a spiritually transformative experience. Can you talk about that?
I didn't know about spiritual transformational experiences until a couple of years later. And I thought I had 2 NDEs. In my mind, that's just what it seemed and felt like. But later I realized that it was. And so what happened then is I'd already had my NDE. And I had a cousin that was like a sister. And she had sent a text to my sister in the hospital that was with me that day and said, "Will you please read this to Holly? Because I know she's not doing very well right now. And I wouldn't usually share a spiritual experience through text, but I think she needs this, to hear this." So they read it to me, and it was basically about her experiencing these spirits that when she was praying for my husband and I, and asked for who was there and named all the names. And that was the beginning of it. And then they must have put me back in a coma, because I remember clearly hearing what they read me, and then I must not have been doing bad. So they put you back in. And I remember being really angry, actually, and being frustrated that that's not fair. Why did she get that experience? I'm the one here suffering. And at that time, my prayers were changing. I was at the point I was exhausted. And I just said, if to God, if you're not going to get me better, then get me out of here. Like, I'm done. And I was never afraid to die, ever. But I was just like, I'm over this, And then that's when I got my experience. So all of a sudden, my mom came to me on my right side, and she had just passed away about a year and a half before. And she said what we hear so much from people saying, but it was true. She said, "It's not your time to go." And she says, "You need to fight. And I remember when I heard that, I kind of cringed because I just never really cared for that word that much. And as soon as she said the word fight, I'm in my bed. So above me, I see all these relatives that had passed away, that had died, and in white. All of them are in white. And I just saw them from like the waist up. I wasn't seeing full body. And I had a brother, a sister-in-law. I had a grandbaby that had just died 6 months before. She was there, but she was an adult. That was really special. I knew it was her though. And then grandparents and aunts and uncles and just a whole bunch of people in that front row. And they started chanting, fight, fight, fight. Every time that word would come, a whole new group of people would come behind them, now in street clothes. And then the kids and my siblings and obviously my husband. And then I just kept seeing every time they say fight, all these people, like as far as I could see, all these people behind them. And it was that defining moment right then when I knew I'd live. It was like, I got it. Okay, fine. It's not going to be easy. You have a long ways back. But I knew then after that, every day, I knew I was going to live. So then it was just a matter of like, what's next? Check. What do I have to do to get out of here? Check. I look back now though, and all those people there that I didn't know, I really believe were all the prayer lists I was on. There were so many people I know all over the world have me, they were hanging on to social media posts for my sisters to post updates on me because everyone just was waiting for the next post to be I had passed away because it was really bad. And so long had gone by that they were shocked. And the love that came out pouring from people later still amazes me. Like it almost feels like a heaven on earth. I mean, one day on earth, actually all the days on earth that we could ever have that are great, 1 minute in heaven is 10 times better.
What happened after you left the hospital, and what went on?
Well, when I started sharing the story, it took me a while to figure out what had really happened myself. When I started listening to the words I was saying, even before I got out of the hospital, I knew, even though I may not have communicated it very well, I knew what had happened. And I have lots of stories to tell, even though my voice wasn't very good because I was still on a trach. And I don't know if they really believed me or they just thought, oh, you just have COVID. You're just in this spot. I don't know what they really thought because we've had meetings later and talked about it. And I still am getting updates, and I'd love to share with you about how I was able to fill in some of the gaps that I didn't have at the time. So a couple years after my experience, I felt like we're writing a book, and at the time I needed someone to help me just put it in order because there were so many stories and so many experiences. And with the long COVID, it still affects my brain. So I started working with one of my friends, and we did all these recordings, recorded all the stories and things. But in the near-death experience, there was still some gaps missing. Like I remember everything I shared, but there was pieces missing, and I knew it. Intuitively, I knew it. And so I called a friend of mine who had certified me for hypnosis a few years prior and asked him if he would do a hypnosis session specifically on the NDE only. And he agreed. And so I drove to Las Vegas and we did that. And it was about an hour, 40 minutes. And he took me, and it just opened up so many doors to the whole experience. It was almost like the rest of the story. And it was so amazing. And it made me feel like everything I had gone through was all worth it. Because let me back up. Prior to this, I had the 2 worst years coming out of my coma and coming out of the hospital. 2 worst years of my whole entire life. You take every bad experience, divorce, combining families. We have 8 kids we had raised, and times that by 10, and it might barely touch the literal hell I felt like that I had been through in those 2 years. When you think coming back from heaven, you would think everybody would open arms to you, and they didn't. It was like I repelled. I had friends and I had a husband that really, and a couple siblings. And other than that, I really felt like every relationship was jeopardized. And then remember, I had that whole feeling of feeling kidnapped that I never could figure out. Why would I feel kidnapped and spell out kidnap after I've been to this best place in heaven? So the hypnosis session, I went with the intention that I was going to get these get these answers. So we got into it. And so here's the rest of the story. So where I ended up, and I think it happened at the point when I was going down the hallway in the hospital bed to the stadium. That was where I say I was hijacked. I was hijacked by an entity. I was taken into what I call the in-between. It wasn't dark and it wasn't light. On the right side of me was the dark, and on the left side of me was the light. So I was somewhere in there. It was shadowy. The colors were still swirling around. Remember the hearts I saw? They were pink rose color. These were like cobalt blue, gray, silver, black was mixed in there. Just a lot of it. Even the entity kept swirling around, and my hypnotist, he said, try to bring an energy all together and see if is it a person? And that's what I realized. Yes, it's a person. So in hypnosis, I'm not afraid of hypnosis because I was trained in that. But what they do is put whoever they want to talk to and find out answers into you. So like I'm talking as the entity. That didn't even scare me. The entity didn't scare me. I was not afraid where I was. I just couldn't figure out why I was there. So he had the entity say to him, when I count backwards from 3 to 1, you're going to tell me your name. And I remember for a split second me thinking, am I going to know my name? Like I just, cause it's me, but I'm him. And as soon as he said 1, I just blurted out Darby. And it surprised me. I was like, okay, I don't know where that came from. And I heard it again, like 3 times the next month after this. So it was just really interesting how it all came about. But Darby wanted my life. So I believe Darby was the one that interjected me from down the hallway before I got to the good stuff, the good concert. And he took me to this in-between place because he wanted my light. And my hypnotist said, can you just let her go? She needs to go to the light. That's hers. And he said, I want her light. I can't go to the light and I can't have it. So I want hers. And then I remember this huge light, bright, and heat of light coming, and it was on my face. I could feel the heat, and I'm still him. And he said, it's coming to take her, and I'm not going to be able to stop it. And the hypnotist said, then can't you just let her go? And he said, I don't have a choice. It's going to take her. And he said, then let her go. And he agreed. And that was when I was able to go over to the light. Meanwhile, twice while I'm in that in between, I look up, and over on the right side, but far away up on a hill, was a one eye on a mountain. You can see behind me, I've got some pictures of one eye. And I wasn't sure what that meant, but I remember thinking, noted. And then I saw it again, and I remember thinking, that's weird, and not thinking anything of it. I look in front of me, and there's this tree. And there was so much relief in my body when I saw the tree, because when I was doing my retreat R&R company and they were doing the branding, I had said, there needs to be a tree in the logo. I had no idea why. Nobody questioned it. The tree came back with 11 leaves and 11 roots on it. And which is 1111. My birthday's 11. I got out of the hospital on 1111. There were just so many synchronicities. But what it really meant to me was that I had created the branding and the logo of this company, of where I was guided to do, without even remembering that tree in the near-death experience. So I was really happy about that. And then I go over to when I'm in the light, and I realized that when I saw those pink matter um, going over, they were always going to the light. And even the dark ones were going to the light. Everything is wanting the light. We all want the light. But over there, they were pink rose hearts. And when I saw them there, it had a whole new meaning to me, because when I created the nonprofit and I put this little gift bag together, it had an ornament that said hope on it to everybody. And it was during the holidays, said hope. And inside each bag, somehow I knew intuitively that they needed a little rose quartz heart stone in each one. Didn't question it. Nobody asked why I did that. I just did it. And it was just such a peaceful feeling to have that. It's like the two things I was basically told to go do that I did. Those were just like reminders, like, you did it. Stay on, you're on the right track. And I had just been through, remember this, 2 years of awful life that I wished so many of those days I would have died. I was in an awful state. I thought, why would God save me to put me through this hell? And now I know, I look back and I see the breadcrumbs, and I see a lot of those lessons that I had to learn for what I was told to build, and the company and the nonprofit that I was told to build. I needed those 2 years. They were tough. I hope I never have to go through them again. And now I see the whys. I was also told in that I saw and felt so much love in the experience I had remembered, but I didn't remember these powerful words. There were two different statements that were made to me. One was love them where they're at, which when I remembered that, changed everything from then on out. Because if I would have came back remembering those words, I would have reacted differently in that situation and those relationships and things that happened for those 2 years. I wouldn't have had those lessons that I needed. I wouldn't have had those breadcrumbs either. And so I knew that, okay, this is the time that I need to know that. And if you really think about loving people where they're at, it changes the energy around everything. It changes the judgment, and people just know what they know. You can't take away or give. You can give people knowledge, but they don't have to accept it. So just love them where they're at. The other thing that I was told was, and they were not the hypnotist's words. They were definitely not his words. All things will be revealed to you. No, sorry. More things will be revealed to you when the time is right. And that every day I say to myself, because I didn't have to know everything. I'm the type of person that always wants to know everything. I don't like surprises if I know they're coming. I have to know. I don't want to be in the dark. And with that statement, I was at such peace, more peace than I've ever felt, because I knew if I would have remembered every detail, things wouldn't have been the same. It would have changed the way everything worked out. And I know now, every time I think about it, more will be revealed to you when the time is right. Amazes me. And I keep getting things that are coming. That's the rest of the story. And I'm excited for it. I'm not afraid at all. But I felt kidnapped because Darby, the entity, took me. And I believe I had to have a spiritual intervention to get back. And that's the rest of that story.
What message would you give to someone who's afraid of dying, or probably lost a loved one recently and is worried about that?
I would go back to that time where I explained what it felt like to be there, and the joy and the happiness and the love and everything good that you don't always experience here, and know that time, all your bad here or all your good here, not your bad, all your good here can be just like a second up there. And so if you think about all the good feelings that you had in your life and all the good experiences that you've had, bundle all that up. And if all that could take with you, how would that feel? How would that change? I mean, for me, I didn't get the choice to come back. I just got put back. I have things to do. I know that, but I understand why people don't choose to come back if they get a choice. So I would say hang in there. It's a beautiful place and there's nothing to fear.
You mentioned that you had several out of body experiences before having your NDE in the hospital. Can you talk about that?
Before the NDE happened, I had a whole bunch of out of body experiences. They may have started before I was intubated. I'm not sure. But what I can tell you is that most of them that were back in time. And when I tracked it later, I was about 165 approximately years ago. I had a couple present time, but mostly they were leaving with my hospital bed. I remember I mentioned that before, and I would take it with me. And sometimes I would have it was like a Connex or a storage crate thing. That was like my room I was in. And an ambulance, don't ask why an ambulance, but it would pull up to it and it would hook up to it and it would take me on my journey. And my sisters would laugh and say, no, you never left this room. Your surgeries, everything was done here. You never left. And I'm like, well, yes, I did. I went everywhere. But I usually had my bed and I was taken to these different places. Most of the time I went back to a little town called Parr, Utah. And it was I knew it was a relative of some sort, but I didn't know what. It was my great, great, great grandfather's home. And now the city owns it and it's a museum. And there was some not so good experiences that I witnessed there. All our family has stuff, right? And there was just some things I saw that I wasn't real proud of. There was some beautiful things too, but just more as a witness to things. There was a staircase though that really was scary. I remember it like circled down into this dirt basement, and it was in this house. And I remember looking down there and having a very evil, creepy feeling, like almost like there was like, oh, this is terrible to say, like test tube babies or something happening down. That was the feeling I remember having and not wanting to look anymore. And later when I went to the home, because they've remodeled it and a couple times, that staircase, that original staircase is still there. And that was a really eerie feeling to actually, oh, wow, I remember this and I remember that. And I remember a field being there, and there was not really a barn, maybe somewhere that maybe help 165 years ago, whatever they had for help was living back there, quarters or things. And I remember I saw good things too, but I just remember those kind of stood out to me. There was horrible things that like happened back there. And joking, one of my nurses I really didn't care for. I was a little concerned with. And I remember sharing with my sisters that I didn't like him. And they said, yeah, we didn't like him either. He's not coming back anymore. And I said, oh, you're right. He's not. I in my head had sent him back to that shed, whatever it was, because that's where bad things happened. It just weird things like that would happen where you're like, why did I do that? And why did I think that? I mean, your mind, of course, COVID is a brain disease and your mind's just in so many different places. But to have things verified later that you saw and then you see them in real life, it's gratifying and also just a weird experience to actually have that verified, or things that people would say or do, conversations that I would ask about that happened that just different places I was. Anyway, those were a couple kind of stories about my out of body.
You mentioned that you received 2 messages and that the first one was to create a nonprofit. Did they tell you what this nonprofit would do or the purpose of it?
So the nonprofit that I got told to start with the name Adventure Bucket Wish, I didn't really get a lot of details on that. Once I got out of the hospital though, and got diagnosed with long COVID, which all those issues come after, that was when I realized, oh, this nonprofit must be to support the long COVID community, which at that time I didn't know anything about. It was needed. It was overlooked. It was necessary. And so I just went with that. I just took that and went with it. and started the 501c3. And we did a couple fundraisers. And about 2 years into that, I realized I was doing a podcast of my own for nonprofit community. And I'm listening to a story somebody's telling, and I'm reliving mine. And I remember not being able to like breathe. I remember that feeling. And I'm thinking, why am I feeling this? I had already had some messages throughout that year. I took all the fundraisers off the calendar that were happening that year. And I felt, just keep doing the podcast. I don't know why I'm feeling this, but something didn't feel right. And during this podcast, I got this download, instant, like, this is not your mission anymore. And this is your last podcast. And I even had a hard time finishing the show because it was like, I was grateful. I was like, oh, finally I got an answer. Like, I didn't understand it. And so after speaking with one of my board members who's pretty spiritual, she said, yeah, but did you actually get told to start this nonprofit for long COVID? And I said, no, actually I didn't. I didn't get a lot of extra instructions there. And she said, well, you're 3 years into this nonprofit. Why don't you keep what you were told to do, the name, and just change the mission to something that feels better? And I think looking back now, I was getting better finally from long COVID. I was finally healing. And I feel like mentally, it just kept me in that sick space that I didn't want to be in. And so for me, we that's what we did. We changed the mission. So it's women leading with purpose. And it just feels so much better now. Anyway, so that's kind of the story on that. It was interesting. It evolved. It was like you got told what to do, you did it. Something wasn't quite right. Okay, shifted. Now it feels great again.
If someone who watches this podcast is interested in contacting you, what should they do?
Well, my email I can give you, it's holly@hollyporter.com. And you can find me on all social media platforms as well. I'd love to hear from you.
Hi, I'm Paul Perry. I just finished re-releasing a book I wrote with Dr. Raymond Moody in 1990. The book is called Reunions. I want to thank A.J. Parr for helping with the technical aspects of doing this book, doing the layout, and he had great advice on how to do a new cover, which he did, and it's beautiful. And all the technical aspects of reissuing a book and how to use Kindle Direct, which is a wonderful service, and communicating with Kindle Direct. But he was also more than that. He was moral support. He would read through the book. He would fact check. He did proofing for the book. And he made a number of really brilliant suggestions for editorial changes. So I highly recommend working with A.J. Parr, and I'll be doing more books with him in the future. So thank you, A.J. I'll be dealing with you a lot more.
If you're interested in publishing your book in Amazon, contact me, and my publishing team and I will lend you a friendly hand. Send your email to ajparbooks@gmail.com. That's ajparbooks@gmail.com. Stairway to Heaven, 25 near-death experiences about our encounters with God, Jesus, and paradise. Journalistic research on real cases by A.J. Parr.
I looked down, there's no body. There's no me, but I felt just like me. And my first thoughts was, wow, this must be heaven. The whole Bible, Jesus, God thing, it's really true. And I said, if you were praying and you talk to God, it's just like that. It's God, you need to send people back so they can tell people it's real. Send some back. They have no idea this is real.
So there was quite a bunch of activity that they were doing during this time. And so, I know they were working on me really hard, but the whole time that I was gone, I went to heaven. So as far as what I was experiencing, it was wonderful, and I was able to see God and to see Jesus.
I turned and I said to this one leader character who had come and collected me, I said, who are you? Who are you exactly? You're not the same as these, because he was not the same as the other angels. And he seemed to be the one that was emanating this incredible love more than anyone else. And he just looked at me and said, I am the one you call Lord. Now, for me, there's only one person in all of history that I call Lord, and that's Jesus. And this was Jesus that I was sitting in front of. And that really did overwhelm me at that point.
I remember feeling all this light, seeing light all around me. And I was just like, when you're in a deep state of meditation, when you go so deep that you don't see what's around you, you just become one with the light. So that's what happened to me. I became one with the light.
At that point, I was turned upward, my spirit was, and I was aiming towards the sky. And I saw a beautiful, bright white, but it isn't a white that we can describe. So it's the brightest light you could imagine here on Earth, but without being blinding.
I cannot die right now. You take me back. I have a lot to do right now. I said, no, you make a promise to me and you need to fulfill your promise. So welcome to heaven. From today, you're part of me and part of all of them. From today, you start walking with me and walking with all of them. Love is the most powerful force in the universe, and that's why I'm going to unite the whole humanity again. And then he said, okay, he put his hands around me and said, let's do a live review.
I just really became fascinated with the light and became just the joy and the love of God and just the peace of God just began to wash over me. Man, I just began to look at my arms and, it's not a light like you just turn on. I mean, this light had like particles. It was just like moving and just covering my arms and my body.
When I was enveloped with that bliss and joy, at first it was all just a bright, warm light. And then it started to like settle down and take form. And it felt like I was in a cathedral, maybe with the marble walls and high ceiling or something, but it was still kind of misty looking. And I know that I had looked over to the right and I saw a good sized, like an architect's table with a great big huge book, like a huge Bible or something, open about halfway. And I remember somebody telling me what was in that book. And I believe it was my life. And I was only halfway through.
Stairway to Heaven, 25 near-death experiences about encounters with God, Jesus, and Paradise. Journalistic research on real cases by A.J. Parr.
This has been the A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.